Hello and welcome to this WAS conversation. It's so nice to have everybody online today. And I would like to raise a special welcome to the WAS members and to those of you who've been joining every single conversation. And also a special welcome to new people that have joined us today. We are busy with the WAS series of conversations on advancing sexual health and rights for all. And this is in preparation for the next Congress of WAS that will be held in South Africa in September 2021. I'm Elna Rudolph. I'm the president of the next Congress, and I'm co-hosting this series with Esiet, who is also joining us today. He's from Nigeria, and he's the honorary president of the Congress. I would like for all of you to please say hello to us in the chat and tell us where you are from. When you have questions for the panelists, I want you to please put that in the Q&A, because we will keep the chat and the Q&A separate. The questions for the panelists go into the Q&A. This series is planned by the WAS Scientific Committee, the WAS Executive, and then the Southern African Sexual Health Association, and also Maureen Wasserman, who is the chair of the local scientific committee, and Anthony Smith is the president of SASHA. We are all working hard together to bring you very good information. And this particular series session, which is sexual politics in the global south, is of course close to our hearts, being in South Africa. So I would like to introduce you to today's panel. They are all switching on their cameras, and I'd like for you to meet all of them here today. So first we've got Pedro Nobre. He is the president of WAS. And we've got Esther Corona. She is the vice president of WAS, and she's from Mexico. Luis Perelman is also from Mexico. He's the secretary general of WAS. Then we've got Alain Jehami, who is the chair of the scientific committee of WAS and also our moderator today. He is from France. We've got Horacio Sívori. He is from Brazil. Well, not originally, but that is where he is today. And then we've got Larissa Kajoué, who is joining us from Cameroon. We've got Esiet, the honorary president of the Congress from Nigeria. And then we've got Shaful Islam Khan, who's joining us from Bangladesh. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us. Then I would like to inform you that we will be going live onto Facebook, but when Shaful Islam Khan is doing his presentation, we will be stopping the Facebook feed just due to the sensitivity of the content. So if you're joining us on Facebook, please go and register for the actual webinar. The link is there on Facebook. Please come into the webinar and join us, because we would actually not like the information to be broadcasted live due to the sensitive nature of it. But you're most welcome to join us. So I would like to start this session on the sexual politics of the global south by just giving a word to Esiet, who is he is the man in Africa when it comes to sexual health, and as I mentioned, the honorary president of the next Congress. And I would like for him to just give a few introductory words. Thank you, over to you.
Thank you very much, Elna. Good afternoon to everyone from Lagos, Nigeria. It's always a privilege to be part of the WAS conversation. My take for today is very simple. Who is opposed to having a sexually healthy world? My understanding is that if we have a sexually healthy world, this will be great for each and every one of us. And I'm sure that the conversations we'll be having today will drive all of us towards achieving this very important objective. Particularly, let me posit at this stage that each time we look at the global south and the sexual politics in the global south, what we tend to see is the inequality that sexuality manifests in the negative sexualities that we see. And there is a lot of underlying issues that drive all of this. Some of it are ideological, some historical context, some cultural, some religious, some economic, and some just about power. And I would like all of us to leave this session agreeing that we as change agents will not continue to support any form of stigma or discrimination against any person or persons based on either their body size, their sexual orientation, their sexual identity, their gender identity, who they choose to have consensual sexual intimate relationship with, and to ensure that we all join the vanguard against dehumanization of human beings under the guise of trying to ensure that they conform with what is perceived to be the norm. I don't want to go into any very specifics at this time, but to also encourage each and every one of us that the journey to Cape Town that has begun is gathering momentum, and to encourage everyone to be with us September 2021 in Cape Town, when the whole world will be coming to Africa for the first time to interrogate positive, pleasurable, self-affirming human sexuality, so that at the end of it all, we can truly say that in Africa, we laid the foundation for ensuring that we leave no one behind, even as we try to ensure that we respect the dignity and human rights of everyone, especially as it relates to our human sexuality. Enjoy the rest of the conversation today, and I look forward to welcoming each and every one of us in Cape Town next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ewan. Well said. And it's been really an honor to have you join us here today. I would like to introduce Alain Jehami to you, who is an emeritus research professor at the French National Institute of Health and Medical Research. He is currently chair of the World Scientific Committee and associate editor of the European Journal of Sexology and Sexual Health, and has multiple publications under his name. Next year, his book, History of Sexology and the Theories of Sexuality, will be published. Alain put together this whole session. Thank you so much for all of your hard work, Alain, in putting this together. And I am really looking forward to see how you handle this conversation. Alain is being supported by Louis Perelman today. And as I mentioned, Louis is the Secretary General of WAS, but I can tell you, being a WAS insider, Louis is the backbone of WAS. He is dedicating his life to the cause of WAS, and he has dedicated his whole life to sexual politics in the global south, making the life of minorities easier. So Louis, it's really an honor to be working with you, and thank you for also helping Alain to moderate today's session. So Alain, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Elna. Thank you, Luis, for helping me to, and thank you, Michelle, to helping me to set up this session. First of all, I want to thank all my colleagues from different countries of the world to have accepted the WAS proposal to participate in this session focused on what we call the Global South. And I know it's a quite difficult enterprise since we all live in different regions affected differently by the COVID-19 and by the social and political responses to its devastation, which increase sometimes the difficulties some countries may have more than others in terms of freedom, economic situation, human rights, intimacies, and so on. The situation is exacerbated the challenges in which we struggle and that we have been trying to understand for many years at WAS and our local activities and practices. The contradiction, I mean, the main idea is to understand the contradiction that appears sometimes between, on one side, freedom and rights, and on the other side, health. This challenge is very important in the discussion that we developed at WAS when we started to develop the idea of sexual health at the end of the 70s, and then by the mid-90s, when we started to work alongside with other international organizations, and in particular the WHO, towards the definition of sexual rights and includes the importance of sexual rights in our various statements, and in particular, the one which has been endorsed by the WHO for sexual health to be attained and maintained, the sexual rights of all persons must be respected, protected, and fulfilled. This statement has been edited by the WHO in 2006, and I can say that it is still at the agenda of today. The link between health and sexual health in particular and rights, and I prefer sometimes to speak of freedom, is essential to the point that we recognize that there cannot be health in the absence of human rights. At the same time of this recognition of sexual rights, human rights, sexual health, we observe in various parts of the world the political limitation to human rights when they are applied to health and sexuality situation. For example, we faced the recent critical situation in Poland, in which the right to abortion has been severely limited during the last couple of weeks and strongly opposed by the social world and women and human rights organization. On the other side, we know also that in different countries of the South, where homosexuality is still criminalized, gay men may be subjected without their consent to humiliating so-called medical rectal examination to detect homosexuality, which is associated in the imaginary to anal receptive practices. We do not speak of the limitation and prohibition of non-marital sexual relation and the obligation of forced marriage for young women and female children. And last but not least, if in some countries the right to express one's gender identity and access to medical treatment for gender affirmative pathway has been acquired, this did not reduce the frequency of transphobic violent attacks and limitation in the access to health service and full citizenship. And they are those two dimensions, access to services and full citizenship, are completely linked in many countries, and especially for these people. By giving this example, I want to remind that this violation in human and sexual rights and their negative consequences over health and access to health service are unfortunately, they are not the privilege of any region. And we unfortunately, these situations are more or less equally distributed in the global world. And it must be clear to the audience of this session that today, by focusing on the sexual politics of the global South, it is not our aim to stigmatize countries of the South, but rather to give space to speakers coming from different continents who have been less present in your international discussion to present the situation, the negative dimension, but also the positive perspective, initiatives that are taken in the region and country, so that we can better understand the specificities of the difficulties that they are facing. But this session is not only about difficulties, whether local or structural, and we have asked also to the participants to try to explain and develop some of the possibilities, initiatives that they may have developed to enhance the lives and rights of various populations in their own country. So let me say it again, this session will not stigmatize country of the South, but we wanted to give the people from what we call the global south, and maybe Horacio will explain to us what we mean by the global south, because we spoke a lot of people from the north, from different other regions, and we wanted today to focus, but global south doesn't have the privilege of this bad situation. It's there, unfortunately, they are widespread all over the world. So thank you for listening to me. And I want to start to give the floor to Dr. Horacio Sívori, who is a long time friend. We met in Brazil several years ago. He is a professor at the Institute of Social Medicine in the State University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, where he chairs the Latin American Center on Sexuality and Human Rights. He was originally from Argentina, but he started to study in the United States and got a PhD at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. He's an anthropologist. He conducted research on gay sociability, the AIDS movement, and LGBT politics during the democratic transition in Argentina. And his current focus is on anti-gender discourse and violence in Brazilian social media. So, Horacio, I'm very happy to have you as a host here. And please, we can start. For 15 minutes.
Thank you, Alain. Good day, everyone. First, I would like to thank Alain, Professor Jamy, and the fabulous WAS team for arranging this conversation, and say how excited I am for the chance to connect with the WAS audience and fellow speakers at this webinar. I hope you can hear me well. We had some last-minute internet problems, but I guess we are okay now. So I'm speaking from Brazil. I am originally from Argentina, but I established in Brazil some 20 years ago, around the time I met Professor Jamy. I hope that in a not so distant future, we may go back to having these conversations the old physical way, distant but not apart we are now. And I'm glad that today we're here together. I felt honored by the invitation made in reference to a book I co-edited together with my colleague, Dutch anthropologist Saskia Wieringa, The Sexual History of the Global South, almost a decade ago, but which seems still timely with relation to the idea of this series, Advancing Sexual Health and Rights for All, and today's topic, the sexual politics of the Global South. As was the case and is the case with the book, it is my assigned role at this session to make a brief general introduction to the topic. So I hope not to sound too general, too abstract, too complex, or maybe too simplistic in my comments. Indeed, the way I see the difference that that book made at the time and the difference WAS is making in the call for today's webinar is threefold in its perspective. And I was glad to hear Uwen affirm what I'm about to say now too as well. It means thinking of sexual health and well-being as collective values and public goods as a qualifier for all indicates. It means also thinking of sexuality as politics. And by that I mean a site for the exercise of power in any given society. And it means, as the focus of the global South indicates, highlighting the role of location in how sexuality is lived, felt, exercised, and regulated. Located always in relation to first specific political, economic, cultural, linguistic, etc. structures, which always represent relations of domination and power struggles. And second, but not less important, located in relation to specific bodies, sentiments, and social representations. Those are all elements dramatically present when you adopt or are assigned a gender, engagement name, a role in a family unit, an ethnicity, a racialized attribute, a religion, a nationality, or are denied the right to one, or need to refuse one. See how markers such as Tamil, Armenian, White American, Venezuelan, Irish, Zulu, Quechua, refugee, Black, Pardo, and Cholo embody deeply felt belongings, representations, and struggles that adopt different meanings and locations in social structure according to no less deeply felt identities such as man, woman, travesti, non-binary, and the multitude of culturally specific genders and sexual identities which do not translate always as easy from one language, political, or historical context to another. So let me expand on what this term location suggests when we talk about sex politics. The conceptual move that permits us to focus on what is now conventionally known as the Global South comes as a critique of the economic and cultural models that organized, and to a great extent still do organize, colonial and neo-colonial geopolitics and politics of knowledge, having representations of a modern, enlightened, developed West as center and the orientalized rest as periphery. The replacement of those representations by this idea of a global South, another territorial metaphor, a convention as any other, is not without its problems. While on the one hand, it means abandoning the obsolete Cold War classification of first, second, and third world, and supposedly breaking with colonial understandings of developed, underdeveloped, and developing nations. On the other hand, the North-South dichotomy to a great extent reproduces the representation of an East-West cultural, political, and religious divide and all its xenophobic connotations. The idea of a global South, however, does not overlook the deepening social and ecological divides produced by the uneven distribution of wealth and resources, of health, justice, well-being, suffering, and death, according to caste, race, religion, language, and national origin. Not only between nation states, as Jamie alerted before, but also within and across them. Think of the world distribution of post-colonial war today. Think, for example, of the multitude of illegal and stateless migrants and refugees, certainly not sexless nor genderless. A discussion of sexual politics is also a discussion of gender and sexuality as markers of social difference interacting with all those variables. Speaking to a global audience of professionals and laypersons engaged with issues of sexual health, may I also reiterate that sexual politics, including the politics of sexual health, are born inextricably bound to politics of knowledge. Think of the scientific investment in sexual classifications and the role of sexuality in psychiatric classification. Jump into geopolitics, think of eugenics, think of the control of venereal disease and later of fertility and contraception as part of both central and peripheral post-colonial and also imperial and colonial modern nationalist projects. Think of the early response to AIDS by queer activism, not only in the United States and France, that is the canon we learn about, but also in most of Latin America. It is in the wake of post-dictatorship constitutional processes, also the time of the AIDS pandemic, that then so-called homosexual movements in Latin America emerged as visible bodies and political voices, promoting the solidary engagement of society and demanding the engagement of state as guarantor of the access to health. Both North and South anthropologists and sociologists observed not only how the demand for access to treatment, but the very development of the first HIV treatment and prevention models had critically depended on the engagement of activists as experts, able to debate at the same level with virologists, public administrators, and capable of designing the most creative and innovative concepts in public health, communication, and comprehensive health care. So much we have to learn from their experience now facing this new pandemic. And speaking of politics of knowledge and of activists as experts, let me talk about the role of sexual diversity and of feminist movements. Of the title of my talk, so far I have spoken of sexuality some, of global South politics, just a bit. Let me talk also a bit about contestation and care, other topics in my title. If health is a borderline concept, I think, allowing for the exploration of notions of care and well-being, but also highlighting the subjection to disciplinary power and under strict moral regimes, the struggles built around women's rights and sexual dissidence have had a pioneer role in the promotion of social change towards a politics of recognition of this different, I will start again, a politics of recognition of dissident identities and the emancipation of subaltern subjects, building strategies around the moral legitimacy of health as a human right. As social movements, feminist, LGBTQI+, sex workers, and other sexual dissidents have organized largely as what North American political scientist Nancy Fraser, inspired by Indian critical theorist Gayatri Spivak, called subaltern counterpublics. That is, alternative collective spaces where members of subordinated social categories, and I quote Fraser, formulate oppositional interpretations of their identities, interests, and needs. By this, I am highlighting the role of contestation in processes of change involving social sexual politics. Mediated by travel, print, audiovisual, mass media, and of late, digital communication, those categories have embraced the opportunity to imagine themselves as communities and networks of mutual and self-care, as a rule against the primary binds of kin, territory, and patriarchal regimes. I would like to finish a bit early, I guess, by highlighting the elective affinity between the principles behind feminist and sexual minority struggles, the affinity between those and the decolonial disposition embodied in Black and other subnational and international liberation movements. It is the most urgent political challenge today. I will start again this phrase. If the most urgent political challenge today is the struggle against neoliberal regimes of political and economic domination, as combined with ultra-conservative local and transnational networks, both religious and secular, the conceptual challenge lies in paying close attention to how different markers of social difference, such as gender, sexuality, class, race, caste, ability, age, and so on, interact, performed by and upon bodies in different interlinked world geographies and ecologies, bodily, territorial, and today, digital. Thank you very much. I really look forward to the continuation of this conversation once we get questions and everyone has spoken. Thank you.
Thank you, Horacio, for this very interesting overview and conceptual and the conceptual tools that you give us to develop the discussion in a few minutes after or two other speakers. So it's my pleasure to introduce now Dr. Larissa Kajoué. Larissa Kajoué is a researcher and I don't see Larissa. Yes, is a researcher in political science. She is working, PhD. She is working at the University of Buea in Cameroon, where she is a researcher in political science. Her experience includes teaching in political studies and human rights projects in West and Central Africa. And we wanted to have people from different countries from Africa for the discussion, which is good. So the title is "I Can't Imagine My Life Without the Internet: Exploring exploring the dynamics of gender, sexuality, and power mediated through digital culture in contemporary Cameroon. And the interesting is that Larissa will present both the difficulties and some initiative in her country. So please, Larissa, it's your turn for 15 minutes.
My warm greetings to everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today to be part of this panel. And I'm very excited also to discuss my current research project on how massive access and diverse uses of ICT challenge sexual and gender norms in Cameroonian society. Whenever I speak about my current research, I'm almost accused of being a Western feminist and of promoting homosexuality in the country. And yes, my work is clearly in favor of gender equality, sexual health, and sexual rights. And I'm also a human rights advocate, and I define myself as a feminist, as an African feminist. I've organized my communication around 3 points. I will start by presenting the context, and then the background of the study that this communication is derived from, and I will end with some perspective on critically thinking about sex and sexuality in African context. So here's my country. We are in Central Africa. We are more than 23 million of people. The country is ruled by the same president for the last nearly 40 years now. English and French are the 2 official languages, and there is actually an ongoing political crisis. If you want to know more about, you can follow it online with the hashtag End Anglophone Crisis. And when it comes to mobile phone, Cameroon is truly undergoing under a digital revolution, I may say, because where electricity or water supplies, for example, do not reach, mobile phone and the internet have reached in less than 10 years. 80% of the territory is covered by mobile phone network compared to less than 60% for the electricity. We are a country of almost 23 million of people, but we have 25 million of mobile phone subscribers, just to give you an idea of how it is. The number of internet users is increasing, same for social media users, and then 90% of web traffic comes from mobile phone. As elsewhere in the world, WhatsApp, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or Instagram are among the busiest websites or application. These new technologies do not only transform the economy, as studies have shown, they also deeply affect social and political dynamics, including sexual and gender dynamics. I ended up a postdoctoral study 2 years ago on the internet, at-risk sexual practices and HIV/AIDS in Cameroon. My study initially targeted men who have sex with men, but I've been denied the research permit twice because same-sex practices are forbidden in Cameroon. I therefore extended my sample to the general population, men and women above 18, sexually active and possessing a way to access the internet. To make sure, however, that MSM were included in the research, I went closer to 2 community-based organizations involved in the fight against HIV/AIDS. So my sample may not be completely representative of the general population in Cameroon, but it's possible to find relevant information about sexual practices in Cameroon. I've applied a mixed method approach, a questionnaire that was designed and distributed online and through face-to-face. The qualitative method used consisted in in-depth interviews, observation, and chat online. All my interviewees were recruited online. I've opened an account that was dedicated to the project on social and sexual networks, such as Facebook, Badoo, or Planet Romeo. My biggest mistake is to have been registered in a WhatsApp group with my personal number. Some videos that I received were highly, highly disturbing. And I guess that's the price as a woman investigating sexual venues online. The results of my study were really interesting, not only in terms of knowledge and attitudes toward HIV/AIDS, but also in terms of who has access to online sexual activities and how, and also the challenges that users face. I've collected my data in the 2 major cities here, Yaoundé and also in Douala. 17 and 20 respondents participated in the survey, including almost 400 online. The median age was 27, and my sample consisted of 58% of male, 37% of female. And for the first time, I included the trans and non-binary people in my sample. That's the big premiere, because never before a research at this level in the country have registered data on trans and non-binary people. So despite a relative equal access to the internet, my results showed that gender, type of sexual partners, and age are main factors that are associated with online sexual activities. And these concern sexual information, sexual entitlement, sexual contacts, or sexual work. Men and transgender aged between 26 to 30 showed higher prevalence and frequency of use of online sexually stimulating materials and sexual contacts than did women. And it's important to notice that in my study, I did not ask for sexual orientation. Instead, I asked, the question I asked was, within your life, your sexual partners are, with probes, exclusively men, exclusively female, as much women as women, as much women as men, more men than women, etc. In that way, I was able to capture the sexual diversity of my sample. So, besides being a well-known issue, the internet appears as the main gay venue in Cameroon also. Indeed, same-sex oriented individuals, as you can see in the table, are the greatest number of participants who have met a sexual partner online. A young man in his 20s told me, "I cannot imagine my life without the internet. I've discovered a new world, and even if it's not the perfect world, it's the only place where I'm proud of who I am." And there is also an increasing numbers of open collective actions, Facebook pages, blogs, and Twitter accounts, YouTube accounts that are moderated by queer people. For example, this is the page of a well-known trans woman. She's called Shakiro, in reference to Shakira. I don't know if you know the pop star, Colombia here. And one of my best songs from Shakira is La Tortura, just to say. So Shakira is totally open about her trans identity and her sexuality, despite the hostile environment where same-sex people, same-sex partnerships occur or queer people live. Globally, everyone seems happy with internet and the outcome in their life. But what is interesting is the profile of those who most reported the negative outcomes. Women, for example, and people who have exclusively same-sex partners. For men who have never experienced same-sex partnership, the major negative impact was porn addiction, while others reported blackmail, harassment, scam, porn revenge. And some reports here, there are many scammers online. I've been trapped twice in less than 6 months. I've received unsolicited porn video, or I've been violently insulted online because of my pictures. So while we expected that mobile internet or ICT use are particularly because of the accessibility, the safety, or the mobility, while we expected that they challenge gender and sexual norms, the study shows that digital spaces can be unsafe space for some people. They are unsafe spaces for some people because these same tools are used to control and inflict harm, and therefore they are having a digital violence into existing threats. So the internet might have opened some doors for regularly excluded groups, subaltern subjects. But these doors present, but these alternative human rights spaces present a lot of risk, and therefore it reinforces a very discriminatory environment. As well as offline, they are violently forced to be silent. They cannot freely participate into public debates as who they are, and they are excluded from vital human rights spaces. I will end my communication with 3 perspectives that I'm actually developing based on that study. The first is grounded on a decolonial approach. It means critically engaging with Western concepts like sexual orientation, gender identity, sexual rights even, etc. The particular ways in producing and organizing knowledge and politics about sex make it difficult to grasp the diverse erotic realities that exist, that are enacted, and that are transformed or mediated through digital cultures. And that's why I prefer to emphasize on intimacy, because intimacy includes, but it's not limited to, sexuality. A lot of studies have already shown that. Intimacy consists in a holistic approach of questions like desire, pleasure, affect, sexual experiences, identities, agency. And in Cameroon, due to traditional values and religious values also, most people do not want to talk about sex or sexual rights, especially the way it is framed, because the sexual rights discourse relies on openness. It's a particular discourse on sex that produces its own outcomes, and therefore erotic practices are transformed into sexual identities that must be protected. And this increases homophobia. So we need another framework to analyze ways of understanding the way sexuality works in African context, or in Cameroon in particular. So rather than focusing on sexual rights, for me, the challenge is to replace sexual politics in relation to broader issues that affect intimacy. So, and what is those issues? For me, it means social justice movements to secure and enhance spaces for whatever consented sexuality, erotic practices, or gender expression exist. And by social justice movement, I mean feminist spaces, but also largely quality public services. Alain has spoken about access to services. I want to go further and speak about the quality of public services, because if a service, okay, I will take the example of the protest. There is an ongoing protest actually in Nigeria with the hashtag End SARS against police brutality. And we have seen a lot of queer people tweeting online and taking up the street and saying that a public service, for example, the police, who is not respectful of people's intimacy, will not respect people's rights. They will not respect people's gender, whether it's a woman or a man. They would not respect or a trans person. They will not respect the people's integrity. And the same applies for public services, for education, in job spaces, etc. The second and third lesson I learned is that we sometimes only focus on ICT users without looking at ICT themselves. What are these gadgets? Where do they come from? How do they work? And most of the phones we use are made with raw materials that come from devastated places, such as Congo. And there is a fierce international competition among multinationals to produce more and more sophisticated technologies. This competition is a key factor in the lack of state stability in those countries, for example, Congo. In the same way, large-scale tech companies also collect, extract, analyze, and own our users' data for profit and market influence, with no consideration for our safety, for their safety. We are thousands here using applications using our phone to go to the internet and using some application with no consideration that cannot protect us in return. So safety is a huge issue in using digital media, and that's why in the name of safety, in the name of access to ICT, we are trapped into two faces of the same coin: digital capitalism on one hand, and also digital surveillance on the other hand. And coming back here in Cameroon, police authorities constantly arrest people that are perceived as gay, forcing them to open their phones, and they use their picture or their online history activities as evidences. And furthermore, the government want to tax every individual using a new phone or tablet, or every application that is downloaded in a phone. If such measures is approved, it would definitely reinforce digital inequalities alongside more traditional and persistent forms of inequality. So I started my study with the aim to document sexual practices and risk related to the internet use for HIV prevention policies. I realized that women and same-sex partners carry a disproportionate burden of the negative digital outcomes. So presented as empowering, these same tools I use as an additional way of monitoring their bodies and their lives. But while I could easily advocate for sexual justice, I'm cautious that the way the sexual right discourse is framed can make it worse. That's why I'm calling for progressive strategies, such as emphasizing on social justice movements and prioritizing terms like intimacy, because people's desire for erotic intimacy is universal and has nothing to do with gender or sexual orientation. And to conclude, definitely, may I invite you to read the book, if you have not read it yet, entitled, it's a queer nonfiction book entitled She Called Me a Woman. All kinds of possibilities are reported in that book, from queer to LGBT to something without even a name. There is violence, there is joy, there is hurt, there is heartbreak, there is conflict, there is friendship, resilience, everything. And that is what makes intimacy. And everybody can relate to that, because as I said before, people's desire for erotic intimacy is universal and has nothing to do with gender or sexual orientation. So I welcome all your questions, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Larissa, for this very interesting presentation, which gives, in my view, a lot of contradiction, because on one side there is a taboo of speaking of sex, and on the other one there is a kind of complete freedom of speaking aggressively about sexuality on the social networks, and this will do, I mean, something to discuss. So maybe we can start a discussion. Luis, do you have any question from the audience to share with us before we start the discussion between the panelists?
Thanks again for very eye-opening and mind-opening presentations. We have to recognize that we're still centered in the West, so it is very important to understand and to listen to what's happening in all the world. Two questions I see from Catherine. Do you think that colonial concepts are used as an excuse or way to explain away the oppression of women in India and Africa, for example, where there is still much oppression? And a second from Esther Corona, for us, considering the importance of all local characteristics, can we find common threads in sexualities in the global South and the rest of the world? Is it possible to develop common strategies to advance sexual rights? These are two questions that we have for now.
Can I go?
Yes, please, Larissa.
The question about finding common strategies to advance sexual rights. I think it's pretty much linked to the social justice movement I was talking in my study, because it's like a global movement. It's not, it doesn't target a specific sector, but it's many sectors in one, like advancing rights for health, advancing rights for education, advancing economic rights, environmental rights. All this is part of a social justice movement where individuals can be seen as human rights subjects, and they will be respected as who they are, and they will have access to all the resources that the world share in common. It's also taking into account the North and the West relationship, because we have a North that is, let's say, wealthier than the South. If in the South we have access to the same opportunities economically, politically, in education, in jobs, the same way people can have it in the North, I think the global justice movement is also about rights of individuals to enjoy a sexual life that is épanouissant.
Fulfillment.
Thank you, Luis. Fulfillment.
Horacio?
Yes, thank you. I would first like to congratulate Larissa, Professor Kajoué, and Sharful, Dr. Ken, for their insightful remarks. And I really look forward to hear more and exchange more with you both. Thanks, Esther, for your question. I think Larissa was very concrete in terms of where these movements meet. But common strategies to advance sexual rights. I would rather qualify that idea of common, because in social movements, a useful category to refer to those kinds of connections have been alliance, solidarity, mutual recognition. And those mean being keenly aware of how our own location with regard to markers of social difference and how subordination and privilege are distributed, affecting our place as researchers, as policymakers, as Dr. Khan referred to, and so on. So the idea of alliance, I think it's important. And today, in the way our world is interconnected, the idea of the more technical take on the idea of network, the idea of networking is also, I think, relevant to think about how to come together. I had a remark in connection to Larissa's intervention. I don't know if it's the right moment, or maybe we could, if there are more questions, maybe I could speak later.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, so Larissa, that was fascinating and evidently so courageous of you to persist in your research and activism. I look forward to really look forward, because of our topics, and not the topic I talked about today, which was more general, but because of my current research, to continuing a conversation about the role of online gender and sexuality-based violence. I appreciate it, especially your use of intimacy, your sociological use of intimacy, both as a value and as an analytical category to capture individual and collective agency with regards to gender and sexuality. I kept thinking about the idea of digital intimacy to address the complexity of digital economies, modes of domination, and forms of online forms of regulation of the online. How human users' representations meet or come apart from principles of digital surveillance. I was fascinated by Shakira, wondering about the physical and digital conditions for her visibility and audibility on social media, where she's located, to what constraints she's faced with, I felt interesting her ability to produce an intimate counter discourse. I think that idea of intimacy captures a lot of the texture of how that's lived and how those connections are made. And that's all for me.
Is it a question or a comment?
We can't listen to you, Larissa.
I'm asking if it's a question or a comment.
Right.
The question was about Shakiro.
Yeah, well, maybe a question that maybe
it is both a comment and a question.
Yeah, it's up to you, man. Really.
Okay, my study have shown that there's really like a more visible digital intimacy than it used to be, because queer people are taking social media and they are doing their thing, and they are doing it publicly. It's not without risk, you know. Shakiro has been arrested by the police more than once, but I think at a certain point, she has become like a popular figure in Cameroon. People even invite her in their video clip for songs, etc. She's like a popular something. And on one hand, this can be seen as a step forward trans visibility and also everything related to gender and sexual rights. But on the other hand, she's so attacked on a personal level, and also all the community that she's representing, that it also crystallizes, divided. Even if, you know, there are some moderate people saying it's her life, you can see that she's someone like we are, there's nothing wrong in her head, but people is still like, this is something we don't know, this is something coming from abroad, and these social media are making you mad. So it's a paradox. We are moving forward with these two, let's say, two blocks that are not fixed. It can move because also technologies move, but that's actually the case. Nothing stable, but it's an ongoing protest, ongoing movement, and we will see with the time how it goes. But at the same time, with the digital surveillances that people face, I'm not sure that's a good news for digital intimacy.
Okay, thank you.
There are two more questions from the audience. I submitted. Thank you for Boniface Sedikali. It looks like Bangladesh has done a lot compared to some countries in Africa. I would like to ask Dr. Sharfoul, based on his experience, what kind of advice he can give to African countries to advance sexual rights. And from Sinue Estrada, global is a term that is used to refer to local actions thinking about global problems. Is the subject of sexual citizenship a local subject or a global subject?
Yes.
So,
Bobby?
you know, yeah. So, in relationship to the what we have done in Bangladesh, and based on that experience, what could be done in Africa, it's a difficult one. But very quickly, I can mention two things, mainly major two things. Number one, first of all, the communities, they need to be empowered, organized, community-based organization, you know, empowering community so that they can raise their voice. That is very important in any country. That's the first step. And the second step, if we remain with the community and don't move forward, then community will be empowered for nothing. And I mean, in terms of getting some solid benefit from the government, from the policymaker, it will be very difficult for the community, right? So the activist, the researcher, the policymaker then we need to produce some good science so that we can talk on science, not on other issue. Talk on science, talk on programs, and then we talk to the government. Because without government involvement in this country, nothing can be sustainable. So unless and until we avoid government, we cannot achieve anything. For example, we worked more than 15 years at least with the government, with the parliamentarians, to make them understand why there are not binary gendership, male and female. You can imagine in a Muslim country, we are talking about a third gender, right? So in a third gender situation, we wanted to make them understand based on our science, our research, that there is a category of population who do not identify themselves as male or as with female. So where do they stand? Where they should go? So government has, in the constitution, government said that they have to protect the rights of every citizen irrespective of their gender identity, sexual identity. So it is the responsibility of the government to look at this issue. It took a long time, but finally the government came forward and acknowledged the presence of a third gender within the gender dichotomy. It means that community mobilization and advocacy with the government and the main political parties are very key to success to any intervention. If we continue to work years after years and we avoid this, we will not be able to successful. Thank you. To be short, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bobby, for this short but very sound and precise response. Maybe I would like to try to, at the same time, close and open the discussion. I think it's important I mean, what I have learned in this discussion is the importance of language. Importance of language, because some people cannot speak at some places, and some other people, they can say whatever they want. And it is very important to take into account the way we address people and to make us understand in the message that we try to convey. The other aspect is based on what Bobby just said, is the importance of research and academic work, which is a kind of source of legitimacy for activism. And in some places, there is not intellectual freedom and freedom of research. Research is not located in an ivory tower, and it is part of the political struggle, and the risk of making research and the difficulties to making research are also an example of the limitation to sexual rights, because every limitation to intellectual freedom is also a political limitation to human rights. So this is important to have in mind, that in order to act, in favor of human rights, sexual rights, we spoke a lot of social justice and global justice also. There is a link between the intellectual work, the political work of the activists. And the last thing that Bobby just said is that we need to convince governments, because in some countries, governments are most powerful and most dangerous powers, and it is important to try to convince and to speak to them a language that they can understand, that they can understand without provocation, maybe, but to make which requires a political strategy. But what I am happy to see that in this session that we wanted to open I mean, and I want to speak to come back to what Horacio was saying at the beginning. How can we come out of those dichotomies? It used to be the East and the West. It was the North and the South. It is the global North and the global South. It was the developing countries versus the developed countries. How can we try to, we need to respect and to recognize the differences, because we have cultural, regional differences, but we need to consider also that we have global view, and which is different from universal. And this is the question, in that appears in many countries. Does the concept of sexual rights, human rights, is it an invention of the post-World War II Western countries, a kind of neo-colonialism, or is it something universal that can be used as a tool in order to develop freedoms and rights in other countries? This is for me an open question, and we need to solve the question and to make those concepts tools for activism and the development of human rights and sexual justice also. So thank you all for your participation. I know it was technically difficult, but I think we did it. We could understand each other, and I hope that we shall have more opportunities to work together, and also in the perspective of the next Congress, of the next WAS Congress that will be in Cape Town in next year, within 1 year, and Elna will tell you more about that. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, participation. Thank you for the audience to be here. Elna, thank you.
Alain, thank you so much. And thank you very much to all of the panelists. This was really such an interesting conversation that we had today. And I'm sure it's a conversation that we will take further over the next year, and then also definitely at the Congress. And I would like to also remind you of our next session that will be a conversation about the struggles for comprehensive sexuality education around the world, obstacles and success. This will take place on the 18th of November. So please look out for our social media links to get the registration document. And then I would also just again like to remind you to come to South Africa for the next Congress, which will be from 9 to 12 September. More information will also follow shortly. If at all possible, we'll have a nice event in South Africa, and we'd love to welcome you with the warmest South African hospitality. And we will certainly have an online event as well to make it possible for people from all over the world to join. So please look out for information there, also on our social media. And please do become a member of WAS and support our vision globally and become a change agent, as Ewan has said. So now to close, we'll just show you a little video of South Africa to invite you to come to the Congress next year.
South Africa, a country on the tip of Africa, where the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean meet. Here you meet the biggest smiles of your biggest fans, all 57 million of us. You'll come face to face with the unexpected and be unexpectedly surprised. You'll meet great minds and you'll meet new ideas. Shed over interesting plates mixed with glasses of different opinions. You'll meet your dancing feet and your inner child. You'll meet inspiration at every single turn. You'll meet an energy unlike in any other place, in the very place where our humanity began. Come meet the biggest experiences of your life, and you'll meet a piece of yourself that will be forever changed. South Africa. Meet here, grow anywhere.
Thank you, Michelle. I hope that made you want to come to South Africa. I see your camera is on. If you maybe just want to give a last goodbye from your side.
Okay, thank you very much, Elna, for this opportunity once more. And I want to thank all our wonderful speakers. Larissa, I understand the struggle that is going on in Cameroon. I wish you safety. Shaful, thank you so much. Horacio Thank you very much, Luis, Alain. I think it's been a very wonderful time. I'm sure we'll have a greater time in Cape Town. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Thank you to everybody. Bye-bye.